Hello and good evening and welcome. I'm going to read a short story this evening, and it is entitled The Adventures of the Mind Detective. I have a small quote at the beginning. It's a verse from the Bible, and it's Luke chapter 12 verse 3. What is spoken in the dark is heard in the light. And I love that verse. It's beautiful, it's poetic, it's so truthful and meaningful. Anyway, this short story is called The Adventures of the Mind Detective. It was Saturday night, just after midnight, and Boise Voice was sitting at his desk in his study room, twirling a pencil through his fingers. Boise was a very unusual detective, and not many people understood him or reasoned with his beliefs. Many claimed he was crazy, as many witnessed him talking to himself, perhaps walking along the street muttering, or sitting on the park bench moving his hands around as he talked aloud, as if somebody was sitting next to him. Or the way he examined various objects carefully, rubbing his hands over the surface and gazing as he rotated it. He heard the natural connection other people left upon objects, or a feeling in a room which was like a conscience imprint. Boise called this method a centonescence. Boise's desk was a small wooden writing desk with drawers below. It had a pull-down tabletop that opened to envelope compartments and little drawers. His desk was untidy, with CDs littered, open books and half-written pages about his mind meanderings in the solemn moments of the lonely, quiet nights. Boise always had a fresh candle in a brass antique candle holder upon his desk. He tilted his head, looking at it from a side angle. He then opened the left desk drawer and brought out a lighter, and grinding sound with a click as he sparked the lighter. Then, with the flame, he lit the candle whilst reciting a small chain of words. Truth, truth, sparkle bright, rise like the full moon's sight. It was appropriate, being a full moon outside. The flame on the wick glared a bright yellow flame. The smell of beeswax subtly oozed in the air. Boise sat there staring at the flame and trying to listen to the most distant sounds, if any. The chemistry in the mind changes at night, where sound seems louder when emitted. He rubbed and scratched his chin, with his top cheek twitching as he carefully listened to every slight pin drop. He heard the cracks from the floorboards in the attic, and the pipes made a sudden clunk. Then he heard a faint siren echoing in the distance. Boise then leant his elbow on the desk with his hand supporting his head. He lazed across his desk, thinking about the new case he was working on. Boise worked alone. However, he did commute with the police now and again, and the police often called him an interfering, nosy man that had nothing else better to do. But the chief constable believed his rantings and ravings, though he did not like to admit it. But Boise helped solve some murder cases in the past. The chief constable considers Boise to be a good source of information. The chief constable never really questioned Boise's methods or where he gets his information from. Suddenly, a car drone gathered near outside, and Boise sat up straight on the chair. He quickly and quietly got up and crept over to the window. He gently pulled back a small gap at the side of the curtains and peered down to the street, where he saw a man get out from his car. And closing it behind him, clunk, Boise took a deep breath as he looked down at the man walking up his driveway. The man stopped halfway up his driveway and looked all around him, but no one was there. Just a quiet, sleepy street with an odd cat strolling around. It was tranquil and still. The trees in the street hung without a leaf rustle. The man continued to walk up his driveway, opened his front door, and disappeared within, with the door closing behind him. Boise looked up to the sky. It was cloudless, and the stars pierced through and twinkled in the deep blue sky. The moon moved at least an inch to the eye's perspective, whilst he stood there gazing for 10 minutes. Boise then sighed and let the curtain go. As he moved his head away, the curtain fell to its resting position. He then walked away from the window and sat back down at his desk and twiddled with his thumbs, rotating them with his two hands joined and resting on his desk. Suddenly, he started to hear voices in his head, whisperings and mutterings. He has no proof. He's still in her shoes. Boise frowned and wrote what he heard into his notebook. Then another voice uttered in the dark, "Calm down, Richard." Then another voice replied, "Stop talking about it in the Voices Forum." Boise was scribbling hard and fast, catching every word, making notes as he went along. The pencil sound softly brushed over the paper. Then a small tap from full stopping his sentence. It suddenly went quiet, and Boise's hand froze with the lead of the pencil digging into the paper, his hand gripping tight the pencil. The voicelitarian's voice then spoke. "Someone is listening." Another voice responded, "I know who it is. I can almost hear him breathing. I'm going to kill him." Boise was all too familiar with the tactics of who he was dealing with, and they rarely used the phone and would often communicate via the Voices Forum, which was the seared conscience voices that run havoc and created confusion. Yet it was where they conversed instead of using the phone, which was easily traceable by the police. The annoying aspect for Boise was that they knew who he was, but he did not know who they were, though he did suspect some people in his neighborhood. But Boise knew the crime. A 6-year-old girl was murdered, and her body was found in Romania. But she lived in Belfast during the child sex trafficking, which was at large in 2009. Boise was putting together piece by piece his case that he would present to the chief constable. The police already knew about the child trafficking that had been happening right under the noses of the people, and many were involved. According to stats, that 150 children were brought to Northern Ireland, which is a lot of children. And those that did bring these children across knew that there was good clientele, or they would not bring as many. Boise sighed and leant back on his wooden chair, and it creaked. He then looked to his watch on his wrist and mumbled to himself, "I wonder." He gets up and goes downstairs, puts on his coat, and quickly left through the front door. Boise once again looked up to the sky, and he sighed as he stood at his doorstep gazing. He then said to himself, "Witnesses are everywhere. Walls have ears, and the grapevine is the source of knowledge." Boise then walks over to his car and opens it and climbed in. Then, as quietly as possible, closes the car door. He turned the ignition with a cogging choke sound, and the engine starts spluttering its murmur. Boise kept his headlights off until he drove out of the driveway. He was considerate, not wanting the bright beams flooding through the opposite house windows. He drove out of the driveway, and as soon as he turned, he flicked on the headlights. Click. Boise drove to the house where the child had stayed when she was living in Northern Ireland. No one was living there due to evidence. Everything within was as it was when the 6-year-old girl lived there with the other children. The house was a terrace house, 34 Elaine Street, Stranmillis. The house had a small poky front garden with a low red brick wall with little pebbles and stones covering the small garden under the bay window. Boise parked around the corner and walked up to the house by foot. While he was walking, he heard another voice state, "He even knows the address." The street was on a slope, but Boise did not have to walk far as he approached the front garden. He looked from side to side. The garden had no gate, just a couple of steps that led up to the door, which was only 2 meters away. Boise stepped a couple of strides and peered through the front window on the right. The curtains were left open, but inside dark, lifeless, and an emptiness. He pressed his hand and face against the glass, trying to look inside. Suddenly, Boise caught movement to the left of his eyes, and he froze with his heart pounding in his chest. His breath deepened. But it was only a cat that stood looking at him. Boise relaxed his muscles from being tense inside and mumbled, "You had me there, Buster." The cat darted across the garden and disappeared into some plants a few houses down. Boise scratched his head and turned to walk away when his eyes looked up and caught sight of the above window, which was slightly ajar. He then hears another voice in his head saying, "If I'm going down, then you're all going down too." Boise snarled and mumbled, "Indeed." Boise looked over into the neighbour's garden and saw the light on that lit up around the edging of the drawn curtain of the front living room. He then looked to the neighbours on the right, and it looked that the occupiers were in bed with all the lights out. Boise looked around. It was quiet, being 1:30 in the morning, and he whispered, "Not a sinner about." He took a deep breath, then placed each foot on either side of the wall around the door, with his legs spread, climbing foot by foot, making his way up. Boise reached his hand over to the little roof of the bay window. A stone dishevelled and cracked on the ground below. He froze and looked all around. He looked to the neighbour's window and he gasped, "Phew, I thought I saw the curtains move there." Boise continued reaching across, his foot slipping slowly down the wall inch by inch, which made a scrape sound. Boise suddenly grabbed hold of the guttering and managed to pull himself up onto the sloped roof. Boise was on all fours, and his hands climbed up the wall, bringing himself to his feet. He slightly swayed from side to side, balancing his feet. He then pressed tight against the wall, giving him stability. Boise places one foot on the windowsill of the bedroom window. He then stretched up and pulled wide the double glazing window. Boise's heart was pounding as he looked to the left and to the right. His head felt dizzy as he said to himself, "Come on, you can do this." Boise had his 2 feet on the windowsill on tiptoes, and he puts his arm in through the window and heaves himself up with his legs dangling in midair. His body rocked forward and his arms reached down to the inside windowsill, where he placed a comfortable, firm rest. Boise gently brought his leg in, reaching down and also placing his foot on the windowsill. He was fully in through the window, but misplaced his footing and fell. Thud! Boise froze and held his breath. He was stiff as he held himself in a squat position. 10 minutes passed, and he stood up with his legs stiff and a wave of pins and needles crescendo through his legs, where they felt heavy and funny. Boise making a low laughing sound like a hyena as he started to step forward. Boise looked around the small bedroom where he felt a presence, and a voice in his head said, "He knows we used it." "What? I used it." Boise with a heavy frown sighed as he continued to look around the room. A small bed running up against the wall with posters hanging above. He felt the little girl's scent on essence, her being there as if she was still in her room. A small, strong heart. Suddenly, another voice echoed within. "They won't be caught." "So what? I used the service." Boise's spine shuddered and shivered as he felt a wave of coldness with visions of darkness. The appearing of a ghost dust, a fear that sparkled with each thought, like the rise of the full moon's sight. A tear welled up in Boise's eyes, and he clenched his head, a thumb on one temple and his fingers on the other. His feet tense and pushing down into the floor as he closed his eyes tight. He shook his head and gasped a little roar. "Ah!" Boise left the bedroom and stood in the small landing of the house, grazing his eyes over the walls, taking in as much as possible. Boise opened the bathroom door and it creaked. He then gazed into the small toilet and had a vision where he shivered and quickly closed the door. Boise made his way downstairs and into the back living room. The room was dark and gloomy, and Boise's eyes readjusted. The room had laminated flooring and a modern glass corner unit with a television on top. A long, low stool ran on the left wall. Abruptly, Boise's eyes widened uncontrollably as he saw another vision of 5 children sitting upon the long stool in a line. Then Boise heard more voices. Who else knows? Find out who else knows. Boise slumped upon the sofa directly behind him and leant forward with his 2 elbows on his knees and his head looking down to the floor. He sat there, and one of his tears fell from his eyes and tapped onto the floor. A voice once again whispered, "He's Northern Irish." Boise looked up, staring in front of him as he muttered, "I'll get you, you wee bastards." Suddenly, he had another vision of another Northern Irish person sitting where Boise is sitting. It was more of a good presence, and Boise said aloud, "An innocent bystander. He must have recognised one of them." Boise then gets up and walked back into the hall towards the front door. Suddenly he heard soft laughter gathering outside. A few people passed within meters, just beyond the front door. Boise froze and heard another voice in his head. He will go home with it, or he will take it home with him. Boise waited for 5 minutes before slowly and quietly opening the front door. He quickly closed the front door, confident and normally, as if it was his own house. He then hears another voice, "You will worship our God." A car drone approached down the street as Boise walked with his head down, returning back to his car. The strange car slowed down as it drove beside Boise's walking pace. Suddenly, bang! In seconds, the car screeched and skidded off quickly with a gathering pitch. Boise had slumped to the ground with blood oozing from his stomach, forming a small puddle. Boise mumbled as he heard echoing footsteps gaining close in a muffled sound. That the voice certainly told them where I was. Boise woke up in a hospital bed, relieved to see a nurse approaching his side. The sunlight beamed in through the large ward windows. The nurse smiled. "It is a fine morning." Her long, thick brown wavy hair with a smile that would brighten any patient. Her pale skin glowed a sheen, her eyes a comforting sparkle, and he smiled back. "Looks like I survived to fight another day." The nurse nodded. "You should be getting out of here in a couple of days." The nurse looked at the clipboard at the end of his bed, making a few ticks with her pen. "Well, I'll be back soon to take your blood pressure." Boise nodded. "Okay, I look forward to it." Then she walked down the corridor. Before she walked down the corridor, she turned and smiled at Boise, and he smiled back. He lay there in a daze thinking, when a voice spoke into his head, "No one will believe him. You were involved. You carried the body." Boise snapped out loud, Who? "Richard Ritzan." And that's the end of that story so far. I might tweak it and work on it. Of course, it's pretty much first draft, but it's an interesting story about a man who is a very troubled man, but yet his heart's in the right place, and he really wants to solve something that he believes happened, and it's a very touching story. And anyway, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you'll stay in tune for more stories and poems and other stuff like that. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. Bye bye for now.